So a couple of weeks ago, I taught a new student and I hadn't heard him before. So we started off with him just improvising over a standard. It was Have You Met Miss Jones? And as he's soloing, I'm thinking to myself, he's got good phrasing, good vocabulary. Not exactly sure what I'm going to teach him. So when he's done playing, I just ask him, what do you want to work on? And he says he wants to get better at making the changes. And he specifically says that he wants to be able to sound like he's making the changes, even if there's no backing track or band behind him. And as soon as he said that, I had a flashback to when I was a sophomore in high school. I was sitting in this rehearsal room in a jazz band, a regional jazz band that I auditioned for. And next to me was the lead alto player, this guy named Godwin Lewis, a name some of you might recognize, still a fantastic saxophone player. And already I was starstruck by Godwin because a couple of weeks earlier in the auditions, I was standing in the hallway peering into his audition room as he was playing, and he was just tearing it up. And when he came out of the room, I was like, what score did you get? He's like, he shows me he's got 100 out of 100. So I'm in the rehearsal room, really excited to hear Godwin play again in this rehearsal. But there's something going wrong with the rhythm section, like there was like a power issue. Anyway, they weren't able to play. So it was just the band. And Godwin had a solo. And when he went to play his solo, even though there was no rhythm section backing him up, you could hear every chord change and it sounded great. And I was thinking to myself, am I able to do that? I thought I was pretty good at soloing. I was practicing a lot in my room, working with Jamie Aebersold backing tracks. But I was thinking, if the Jamie Aebersold backing track wasn't on, would I still sound like I was making the changes? And I realized I was under this spell of false competency, which is like a couple of weekends ago, my son and I were at a friend's house, and in the driveway, there was this scooter, and he loves to scoot. He has one at home. It has 3 wheels on it, and he just goes all around the driveway really, really fast. But this scooter only had 2 wheels. So as soon as he got on it, a few feet into his scoot, he just wipes out and quickly realizes that 3rd wheel was a huge crutch for him. This situation of making the changes with a backing track, well, that backing track is a lot like a 3rd wheel. Anyway, it took me many, many years after that rehearsal to figure out how to make the changes without any chords behind me and still sound good. I came up with this paradigm of improvising horizontally and vertically. And I'll explain what that means. So let's start with the vertical. Vertical is playing harmonically. It's playing notes that fit the chords, chord tones, scales, all that stuff. And when I learned to improvise with one of my first saxophone teachers, Will Vinson, he taught me to just arpeggiate the chords. So we'd be playing through a tune in the Charlie Parker Omnibook, and I would just arpeggiate up 1, 3, 5, 7 for each one of the chords. And that was a good way to start really learning each individual chord. But it's not enough to just get really familiar with the chords. You have to get familiar with the tunes and the chords within those tunes. So for example, years ago, I was in a jam session and it was getting to the end of the night and I still hadn't had a chance to sit in. And I really wanted to play. So they called a tune and I kind of knew it. So I got up there, and as soon as I started soloing, I realized I really didn't know the tune, and I was BSing my way through the solo. And this is called skating, where you're just skating over the chord changes. You're not really dialed in or locked into the individual chords. And that's what my student wanted to avoid. He wanted to not be skating over the changes, but rather improvising through the changes. So the vertical component is where you're playing the notes that align with the chords. But that's not enough. Because if you just focus on the vertical and not the horizontal, then, well, you end up like you're having your boyfriend or your girlfriend over for dinner and you want to make this nice dinner and you're going to make sushi, right? And then you're like, okay, what can I make as an appetizer? And then you make garlic bread. Now, that garlic bread and that sushi might be the best garlic bread and the best sushi you've ever made, but those two things don't go together. So the horizontal thing is all about playing lines that work in sequence and work together on a horizontal or melodic level. Now, the way to do this, the way to improvise vertically and horizontally, it's actually pretty simple. All you have to do is play something and then play it again, but change the notes just enough to fit the new chord. That's really the gist of it. Now, one of my favorite examples of this, one that really just sort of rocked my world besides the Godwin Lewis experience, was listening to a Chris Potter recording where he's in a master class and he plays this like epic rendition of All the Things You Are. It's like 10 minutes long and it's just him. And as he's improvising, you can hear every single chord change. And it's not just a bunch of arpeggios and random notes that fit the chords. There's also that melodic thing happening. And he's doing that by repeating his ideas, but changing them to fit the chords. Now, if you haven't checked out that recording of All the Things You Are, I'll link it up in the description below. But the other thing you have to remember is when you listen to it, you might hear the repetition, you might also not. And that's because the more advanced the player, sometimes that repetition can be a little disguised. it's in like camouflage. It's still there, but it becomes more implicit than explicit. So if you're a beginner and you're not hearing the repetition, I highly recommend starting out by studying melodies, because melodies are melodic and they also align with the chords. So they have both horizontal and vertical. Take for instance the tune Tenor Madness. You've got the first idea and then it's repeated and one note is changed so that it fits the chord. That's it right there. Now, if you want more of a step-by-step guide to learn how to make the changes in this way, I teach it in my courses, Making the Changes and the Soloing System, both in slightly different ways. But you can actually get both of those courses now within the Soloing Bootcamp, which is the special deal I'm offering. That's also linked in the description below. And if you want to learn more about how to make your solo sound good with just the chord tones, because that's a really good place to start, because that's going to get your vertical thing happening, I have this great video. I think it's called The Right Way to Improvise with Chord Tones. I'm going to link that up here, and I highly recommend you go check that one out as well. So I'll see you over there, and thanks for watching. Bye-bye.